Today I'm gonna paint slash draw a chrysanthemum-ish flower as a little birthday card for my mother-in-law, and tell you the story of my art and design and animation career so far. My art journey, I guess you could call it. If you're new around here, my name is Bård Edlund, and you'll never in a million years guess how Bård is spelled, but that's okay. You don't have to spell anything, you can just relax. Safe in the knowledge you've found the slowest video on the internet, 100% free of screaming kids, cash giveaways, advice about optimizing this or that, or acoustic tiles, or purple backlights. None of that here, just a guy talking in a monotone voice while trying to figure out how to use these watercolor pens. And like I said, I'm painting slash drawing a flower, and it's gonna look really bad for a long while, and then it kind of comes together decently towards the end. So it's fun in its own way, in its own slow way. But anyway, I started drawing as a kid, like I guess like everyone did. But I kind of, it was something I was good at, I guess. And I sort of realized that when all the other kids would ask me to draw things for them in school, and I guess like kindergarten and things like that first. My mom never really picked up on the idea that maybe I was kind of good at it. I think she didn't really understand why the other kids felt that way. My dad kind of got it more. My dad worked in a field that I guess was called pre-press. So he cut into like these colored acetate-like film things in order to aid the reproduction of photographs in newspapers and magazines. I shamefully don't really understand much about that process. It's a kind of work that doesn't really exist anymore now that everything is done digitally. And I represent a generation in which everything started to be done digitally, so in a way you could say that I made my dad's work irrelevant, but I can't really take the blame. Anyway, what I'm trying to do here is just, I guess, get a couple of colors down in a kind of a starburst sort of way. And I'm not really working from reference photos here. I did look up a few photos just to sort of understand some basics about the kind of structural details of this kind of flower. But I'm mostly just kind of making it up as I go. And that probably becomes apparent over time. Maybe it's already apparent. But yeah, so it's almost like doodling in a way. And like I said, I don't really know what I'm doing with these watercolor markers. So I'm kind of experimenting, and but there are some steps along the way here where I add some water and get a little funkier with it, and get a little aggressive with it in a way that I think kind of helps. If you've been following along on this channel for a bit, you know that I've sometimes talked about how I'm somebody that tends to do things kind of carefully and precisely, and I'm trying to break out of that lately when I'm doing these natural media kind of pieces. So my foray into collage recently, and when I do these kind of drawings, I'm trying to trick myself into being a little bit more expressive and a little more chaotic in my mark making somehow. And right now it doesn't look like I'm accomplishing that, but later on I'll get funky with it. Anyway, as I got a little older, computers started to be a thing, and I got into digital art. I had a Commodore 64, and then later a Commodore Amiga. And for younger viewers, these were computers are super popular, especially in Europe. They were kind of precursors to Macs and PCs in a way. And the Amiga in particular really was a machine for creatives, and a lot of people of my generation got started on those computers and have a kind of perhaps absurd love for them still. I used to use a program called Deluxe Paint, if there are any old Amiga heads out there. So I got into sort of digital art. I was looking at sort of rave posters and stuff like that, even though I was too nerdy to be into rave music. But I was inspired by those kinds of graphics. And then I also got into like 3D programs and stuff, very early ones. And I thought that, you know, as I was sort of a tween and going into my teenage years, while I was in middle school and high school, I started to imagine that this could be a career for me somehow. But I was very pragmatic, and so I didn't think it was super likely that I could become a fine artist. So there was a school in Oslo, Norway, where I grew up. That was a private sort of college for art direction in kind of in the ad industry. And that was kind of as far as I was able to kind of dream, I guess. So I thought that could be good. But I never ended up going there. And I'll tell you why. It's actually a pretty interesting story. I did also consider sort of the state art school in Oslo, which is a very good school, but it's very, very small. I think at the time they only accepted something like 12 or 20 students per year or something like that. So yeah, I just thought that wasn't really something to bet on. But what happened instead is that, you know, the internet was starting to really take off, and I started chatting to random people on this app called Powwow. It was actually programmed by Native Americans, which I thought was really cool. And Powwow was a precursor to programs like ICQ and AOL Instant Messenger, things like that. And this was such a kind of an early time on the internet that people were still just excited about the idea that you could talk to strangers online. And we weren't really concerned about the dangers of that yet. So I would literally look at, they had kind of web pages that listed, and you could list yourself. Just be like, hey, my name's Bård, I live in Norway. And then you'd look and find like someone in Belgium or Australia or the US, or, you know, and you kind of would just look for people who were like living far away from you, and just it would be interesting to talk to them. So I was doing that, and I came across somebody that said they lived in Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States, and started talking to him, and we developed a friendship. He was much older than I was. You know, he was probably in his 40s or something like that. and he had a wife and a young kid, and I sort of got to know all of them. And when I told him about my plans or my dreams of studying some kind of art or digital art or illustration or graphic design, like any kind of commercial art that's being done on a computer, they told me that just randomly, they were like, you know, there's an art school here in town that is supposed to be good. I researched it a little bit and found that they were talking about a school called MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art. And it was indeed a good school. In fact, it was one of the top-ranked art schools in the United States, and the oldest degree-granting art school in the country. And you know, when you're young, you don't always think that there's any limitation to what you can do. So I applied. You know, that's how it works when you're that young. So anyway, yeah, I got into MICA and promptly moved to the United States, met up with the guy that I had talked to on Powwow and his family, and I stayed with their family. They were kind of an unofficial host family for me for the first month or something that I lived in the US. And they were amazingly kind people, and really helped me get set up in a brand new country and a brand new city. By the way, I've sped up the video a bit here, but this is I like this part because I'm kind of being a little crazy with that brush. This is the kind of crazy that you get on this channel. It's a very low-key kind of crazy. But yeah, I'm kind of getting a little bit more like watercolor-like here, which is fun. I know it still looks awful, by the way, but things are starting to happen. I made some notes about what to talk about. Let me scroll down here. Oh yeah, so before I moved to the US, I had started a website. I learned how to design websites sort of on my own, as many of us did back then. We would sort of hand code things in HTML. And I had a very strange kind of artsy website with very unusual navigation, and I would put my kind of artwork on it. And once I got to art school, I continued to develop that site, and it continued to grow in popularity. And in some small scale way, it became kind of famous. And by famous, I don't mean, you know, I'm not talking sort of Hollywood famous, but among a certain subset of people online, especially among kind of creative people online, a reasonably meaningful percentage of them were aware of my website. And this helped me when I was graduating school, which I'll get to in a second, but about sort of midway into art school, I started to try to send my work out to different magazines in the US to try to get illustration work. And it started working. I actually became a professional illustrator while in art school, which is pretty uncommon, I think. But it wasn't... I wasn't making enough money to live off of that or anything, but it was just like a a couple of jobs here and there. But they were for big, good clients. So things were looking up for me, you know? But then a problem arrived. By the way, this is some of the craziest action you'll see in this video. I'm drawing these leaves. Things are starting to get interesting, so... or yeah, at least I feel like we're about to get somewhere interesting with this drawing. But what was I saying? What was I saying? Oh yes, I got my illustration career going while in school, but then I had this realization that... So I was in the US on a student visa, which is the only way you can sort of do things. And I was pretty naive about the United States immigration system. And I learned that I couldn't be taking on freelance work indefinitely because I forget sort of there's a couple of stages to this visa. You can get an extension in order to get practical work experience, and then you would have to get a full-time job on something called an H-1B visa, which you can get for like 6 years, I think it is. But that relies on a company wanting to kind of sponsor you for that visa. And that involves basically a company feeling that there's no American talent they can hire that can kind of compete with what you have to offer. So in other words, the idea is that you have to be exceptional in some way. So anyway, my realization was that freelance illustration was not really a career that I could go on with, because as soon as my visa would expire, I would have to land a full-time job on an H-1B visa in order to be able to stay in the country and continue to pursue my career in some other form. I wanted to be a freelance illustrator, but it would become illegal for me by the time I graduated. So I utilized my somewhat slightly famous website as I was nearing graduation, and I announced on there that I'm about to graduate and I'm going to be looking for a job. So if anyone's interested, contact me on this email address. And this was in 99 into 2000, which is when I graduated with my bachelor's degree as an illustrator. And the context here is that at that time it was sort of the tail end of what's known as the .com boom and then eventually bust. But we were still just barely hanging on to the boom, and so people were hiring pretty liberally still. Not as much as... I would have been better off if I had graduated like maybe 2 years earlier, but it was still an okay time to graduate. And I actually ended up getting, I think, either 3 or 4 different job offers before I graduated, which is a very, very lucky and privileged circumstance. A couple of the jobs were in Atlanta, which I had never visited and didn't have a particular desire to visit or go to be honest. and it seemed very hot. I was already sweating in Baltimore. And really, my dream had always been to go to New York, so I was really looking for jobs in New York. But they were interesting job offers, especially one of them was for this, like, cool design firm that it seemed very cool, and they seemed to be... Supposedly they were, like, big fans of my work and stuff, which was kind of a nice, like, ego boost, you know? And I also found out that some of the people who worked at that firm had quit because they became millionaires because they had stock options in this firm, and then it got acquired by a bigger firm or something or other. And so it seemed kind of like, wow, you know, this could be something. Yet I guess I was maybe smart enough to realize that I'd probably already missed that window and that things might be going downhill instead. And I needed something very safe because, you know, I needed a job that was going to last. And out of the different options, the safest seeming one was to work as a designer for CNN in New York. The creative director of the financial news website of CNN had liked some of my illustration work, and on the strength of my website also felt that I could do work as a designer, which I think was a fair assumption. By the way, in the drawing here, I guess I've decided that this chaotic distribution of color is now perfect. And it's time to use my fountain pen. So that's what you're seeing here. I'm going to now add line work to this whole thing. And this is actually when it starts to come together. Not right away, but over the next several minutes, I feel like it starts to get a little bit more of a successful piece. Anyway, I ended up taking that job with CNN, and you know, CNN I think has become something that it's kind of sad what it has become. I feel like not if you're some right-wing dude, those are not the reasons why I think it's sad. But, you know, once upon a time, it used to really be an impressive news-gathering organization. And it still is in moments of sort of crisis or, you know, big news moments. I still think that they do a pretty good job, and there's many good reporters and talented people working there. But as a business and like just a profile they choose to have, all the kind of talking heads and all that, that was never my jam. And I just wanted something that was like serious news gathering. But what was cool about working for the financial news website arm of the CNN machine was that the financial news part was always just really good and very just, it did good reporting. When I first got that job, I had zero interest in finance and in money and in numbers. Not only did I not have much interest in it, but I was also I just had no idea about any of it. So it was a little bit of a leap for them to take a chance on me in that regard, but I guess they just felt it wasn't that important to know all that stuff, that I could learn some of that. And that's what happened. I learned and became more interested in money and finance, surprisingly, because I was very anti that kind of stuff when I was younger. And I still am in a sort of philosophical way. But I now understand that understanding finance and understand, like following the money, is a good way to understand what's actually happening in politics, in culture, and in news. Just understanding world events through where's the money flowing, what is capitalism, how does it all hang together. If you're going to be critical of capitalism, it helps to know what it is and how it works, and who's on top, and who they're stepping on to be on top. And so that whole universe became interesting to me, and I stayed at CNN for 12 years. I started out as a designer, then I became, I think that it was called an advanced multimedia designer or something like that, and then maybe senior designer. Eventually I became art director, and then for I think maybe about a year I was sort of the acting creative director, and led a small team there, and I liked all of it, but what I didn't like was a couple of things. One thing is that operating a website became less and less interesting to me, because web design used to be something where you were free to design, but as more and more engineers became involved in it, it became sort of devoid of creativity, and it became just about A/B testing, which button gets the most clicks, and there just wasn't room for much creativity. So I started to pivot towards more animation work. I'd been doing all these kind of very creative data visualizations, and I became kind of known for that. And I just started making stranger and stranger ones that were less and less appropriate for a news organization, or at least so they thought, maybe, or I don't know, maybe it wasn't so much, maybe I thought that, I don't know. And also there was I was an acting creative director, and I decided I would quit if that acting creative director title didn't turn into full-time on for the future creative director. And that's what happened. But also I just think, aside from that, it was just kind of time to do something else, and I wanted to try to finally do something independently, I felt that I had a lot I could do that I didn't have the chance to do in that role. So I quit my job. I'd saved up a good amount of money from just working in that kind of corporate setting for, a dozen years. And I just thought, I'm just going to be an artist for a while. And then if I can get some kind of freelance gigs, because by the way, by now, I had been married for a long time and had a green card, and so I no longer had that restriction on freelance work. And so I started this thing called EDLUNDART, which is a design and animation studio in New York, which was, I guess you could say, a spectacular failure in the first year or two, but it was sort of on purpose. I didn't really try to, I needed a break. But during that time, I developed this kind of cartoon character called Franklin the Lady's Cat, and I put it on Kickstarter, and was successfully, I successfully funded it, and I produced a little short film, and it's a kind of a Roger Rabbit kind of thing, where it's a layering of animation on top of video footage. It's sort of embarrassing looking now that I look back at it. But at the time, it felt fresh and funny and interesting. And while I probably didn't nail the execution of it, I was proud that I was able to, enough people liked it that they funded it, and I produced 3 more episodes. And there's more to this story that I could maybe tell in another video. Franklin the Latest Cat almost ended up on premium cable television in its own series, which I've never really talked about. And there's not that much to the story, but it was an interesting time, I'll say that. After doing Franklin, I made a bunch of really kind of creative and weird data visualizations that ended up getting a lot of press, and that helped me eventually get jobs to do those kinds of animations for different clients. And then that led to, I sort of branched out from that to more narrative animation work for all kinds of clients. I've done work for everybody from my old employer at CNN to NBC News, The Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, DJI, who else? Stack Overflow. I've done a lot of work for them. PepsiCo. I don't know. You can look at my website. It's a bunch of people. And a lot of it is animation work, and some of it is in data visualization, some of it is in illustration, and a good chunk of it is in graphic design. So I'm somebody who's sort of like a jack of all trades, and the only thing I'm bad at is what you're looking at right now, which is drawing nondescript flowers. No, there's many other things I'm bad at, and for whatever reason, in the last year and a half or something, I decided to start this YouTube channel, and a lot of what I've been doing is I've been kind of sort of pausing my animation career a little bit. I mean, if a gig sort of falls into my lap, I'll probably take it. But I'm kind of deliberately, I guess, trying to get this channel to work a little bit. I'm not really doing the things I should be doing to try to grow the channel, but I'm really only interested in it if I can do things I want to do. So I'm just going to do things I want to do and see what happens. And one of the things I want to do is just less kind of the digital, more kind of formulaic work that maybe I've been doing for a while. I want to get back into doing things by hand. So that's why I've been doing some like collage work recently, and I'm trying to get it back into drawing and some painting, and I'll do digital work too, but I think when I do that, it's just going to be more free, more, I don't know, just more experimental maybe, or just doing work for me, And I guess the kind of eventual goal of this phase of my career is to try to gain yet another level of independence where I'm not just doing client work, but maybe eventually creating images or designs or things, products even maybe, I'm not sure. But just things that I can eventually sell more as a fine artist / as a designer of like prints maybe, or just things that are just kind of purely me and that I can sell to my own audience, such as it is. Currently, my own audience is a pretty ragtag bunch. It's not I don't think I have that many repeat viewers on this channel because my channel is very scattered. I make videos about all kinds of things. They're all things that are about creativity and about art and animation and design and film and illustration. It's all stuff I'm interested in, and it's all creative stuff. But usually to be successful on YouTube, you essentially have to make the same video 200 times in a row. And that's how people want to subscribe to you, because they just want to keep watching the same thing over and over again. And by the way, that sounds like a harsh critique, but there's channels that do that I watch religiously. I like that too. I just don't like it as a creator. As a creator, I want to try different things, at least for a long while, you know, just see what kind of fits. So if you go to my channel and look at my videos, you'll find all kinds of different things on there, and hopefully you like some of them, and hopefully eventually maybe my incredibly magnetic personality and you know, the dynamism of my voice and my just stunning good looks, I don't know, something will draw you in, and you'll watch videos I make because you kind of sort of either like me or tolerate me. That would be a dream. But until then, we're stuck with what we're doing here. So this drawing is sort of coming to an end here. I think it's starting to, you know, it's kind of came together, right? Like, there isn't that much of a relationship between the color and the line work. It's sort of like I just made a sort of a starburst shape. Here's a look at it after I scanned it in. But I don't know, there's something kind of explosive and fun about it. I like how, especially towards the edges of the thing, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of more painterly, I guess, or something. It looks a little bit more like somebody might have used some watercolor in this thing, and that's fun for me. I like how I didn't really know what I was doing with this. I like when I smudged everything together and it became a little muddy and just lose control a little bit. That feels good to me. And I'm reasonably happy with this drawing, which is one of the highest degrees of happiness an artist can ever reach. So, you know, I guess I'll settle for that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Hit the like button. I mean, you've been sitting through this whole thing. Well, the least you can do is hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And let's hang out again in the future. I'll see you soon.